What is the current situation of the Ferrari, McLaren and Red Bull teams before the Miami Grand Prix? Which team is favored in which sector? Let's look at all the details in this video along with the statements from Zach Brown. Is McLaren really that much favored for this weekend? Let's look at all the news in detail, but before we start, please leave a like, subscribe and turn on notifications to support the work I do. With that said, let's begin. The Miami Grand Prix is the next major challenge for Ferrari. The current Formula 1 is a game of delicate balances, where every detail can change the fortunes of a weekend. The truth is that the Red One has not shone in winter development. The much-discussed yet disappointing Project 677 is dashing the renewed hopes of the prancing horse. Each circuit brings with it favorable characteristics and obstacles. In Miami, the crucial issue will be finding the right balance in the setup. Point: an effective balance that allows the single-seater to perform at its best on the dry lap and over the distance. However, the SF25 continues to coexist with obvious technical limitations. Without a foundation, improvising is impossible, that's the reality. The team can only optimize what it has, also relying on the talent of the drivers. Leclerc has proven to be crucial in this context. The Monegasque manages to drive above the problems, like few others, quickly adapting to the conditions of the car. Lewis Hamilton's adaptation is more complex as he continues to seek the ideal feel with the car. The 7-time world champion is struggling, and without concrete updates, the quality leap remains far away. The one in Florida will be an interim weekend. The real updates will come later, we said, between Imola and Spain. But there are still expectations of a good result, remembering the podium achieved last year and the good qualification. The American track is extremely varied. In fact, there are wide curves in the first sector, slow sections in the second, and long straights in the third. A setup is needed that can combine aerodynamic efficiency and mechanical traction without excessively penalizing either aspect. Ferrari has chosen to set up the work starting from the first sector, based on simulator data, trying to limit the damage in the fast curves and then refine the balance for the other areas of the circuit. A challenge shared by all teams, but that weighs particularly on Maranello, forced so far to extreme solutions that have not paid off. The second sector remains the Achilles heel for the SF25, not for lack of mechanical grip. In fact, the car has shown good skills at low speeds as much for the inability to excel across the entire range of curves. Improving one area means sacrificing another. In Jeddah, for example, the gap in qualifying opened up right in the first sector due to suboptimal tire management. Last year, right in Miami, the SF24 suffered excessive overheating at the rear. But here comes a possible positive key for the 2025 weekend. Tire activation, a Saudi Arabian weakness, might be a strength in Florida. A more gradual management could favor the consistency of grip along the lap, avoiding thermal peaks. The team has worked intensively to improve behavior between qualifying race. McLaren, with its MCL39, has shown how important it is to have a wide usage window, and useful Ferrari will have to find a solid balance between aerodynamics and mechanics to enhance every sector of the track. In the fast stretches, the SF25 could have its say right behind a Red Bull that is favored on paper. Only in these stretches, if it can confirm its competitiveness in acceleration, Ferrari can count on an important weapon for the race and limit the damage in qualifying by compensating for the shortcomings in the more technical sections. And we've said it, McLaren is the favorite for this weekend in Miami. There is smooth asphalt, there are slow curves where you need to have mechanical grip, where McLaren seems to excel. We saw it in the first sector in Jeddah, and also pay attention to the temperature issue. In fact, the tire wear is not high, it leads to a softer range of Pirelli, and the asphalt is smooth. However, the temperatures will be high, so there could be overheating of the tires. A topic that McLaren in particular manages very well, and it's one of their advantages, so be careful. So I think Miami is a track that favors McLaren, but there's also an aspect to consider. Beware of the sprint race that gives little time for teams to work on the fine-tuning of the setup and therefore on the extreme optimization of the balance. A point where Ferrari struggles a bit more and therefore goes stronger on the sprint race weekends. In fact, the Miami Grand Prix is shaping up as another great opportunity for McLaren, which aims to confirm itself at the top with a possible 1-2 finish. The Woking team has managed to build an extremely effective relationship from a technical point of view, dominating the start of the season thanks to a complete and well-balanced package. The new technical directive TD018, which will limit flexible wings, will come into effect in a few Grand Prix, but it should not seriously affect the performance of the MCL39. Although some minor adjustments will be necessary, the British car did not build its advantage solely on this aspect. For now, McLaren can still maximize its potential. The Miami layout rewards the characteristics of the English single-seater, a combination of fast curves, slow stretches, and long straights. The versatility of the MCL39 is proving to be one of the keys to the season, adaptable, stable, and balanced. Unlike other teams like Ferrari that struggle with technical compromises and extreme setups, in this case, McLaren manages to handle the operational window of the car much better, maintaining competitiveness in various conditions and configurations. In 2024, the MCL38 excelled in fast corners but struggled in slow ones. This year, McLaren has filled that gap, improving traction and handling in the more tortuous stretches without giving up speed in wide radius corners, a balance that will prove to be fundamental in Miami. In the first sector, characterized precisely by fast support corners, the MCL39 should excel, potentially pulling away from Ferrari already in qualifying. While in the final two sectors, the challenge with Red Bull will be played out and McLaren can count on exceptional traction and optimal tire management, while the RB21 will try to recover in the long straights thanks to its superior top speed. And it is here that the only real limit of the current McLaren emerges. The top speed is not up to Red Bull's, and in Miami, it could become a weak point in high traffic areas. So far, this has not weighed too much, but with the arrival of the new directive and the developments expected from the opponents, the picture could change already from the Spanish Grand Prix. With only one free practice session scheduled for the start of the sprint race format, simulator work takes on a decisive weight, and on this front, McLaren has proven impeccable. On the contrary, Red Bull has struggled more on weekends with the sprint race, while Ferrari has shown that it can manage. The difference will also be in the tire's thermal management. The MCL39 has already shown a remarkable ability to maintain consistent performance even at high temperatures, a crucial detail on a hot circuit like Miami. In fact, there are only two weak points for McLaren at this moment, the top speed and sometimes the qualification. In fact, when McLaren didn't start in front, for example in Japan where Verstappen took the pole position, it had more difficulty overtaking. Even in Jeddah, Piastri won. However, due to Verstappen's penalty, McLaren struggles more with tire management when in dirty air. And without having that top speed that Red Bull has, it struggles more to overtake. To be clear, McLaren is currently the most competitive car on the grid. It's like searching for a needle in a haystack. I want to reiterate that, in my opinion, they are the favorites in Miami due to the track's technical attributes. But there is also a difference between the two McLaren drivers. In the first 5 races, Piastri and Norris had the best car of the 8. But while the Australian took every opportunity to assert himself, Norris continued to make mistakes that compromised his performance. The numbers don't lie. So far, Lando has always lost in the direct comparison with Piastri, even in the rare cases where he finished ahead. In Melbourne, the race strategy helped him by slowing down the Australian driver. At Suzuka, Piastri was faster, but he couldn't attack again due to team orders. Analyzing the 5 weekends that have been contested so far, it's clear that Norris has never really been flawless. In Melbourne, he risked going off track in the rain, unlike Piastri who only ended up in the grass. In China, he lacked pace while his teammate won. At Suzuka, his mistake exiting the D-box made him chase Verstappen. In Bahrain, he qualified 6th. In Jeddah, he crashed during qualifying and finished just off the podium in the race. With increasingly solid performances, Piastri is earning the status of lead driver on the field. He's less experienced than Norris, but more clear-headed and consistent, and he seems to have all the right cards to truly fight for the title. The Australian's coolness contrasts with Norris's instinctiveness, which is sometimes counterproductive. Zak Brown, the team's chief executive officer, knows a clash between the two drivers is inevitable. The MCL39 allows both. As the World Championship approaches, the possibility of internal conflict grows more likely. And with rivals like Verstappen, Leclerc and Russell ready to take advantage of it, McLaren can't afford mistakes. The MCL39 is a formidable single-seater but not invincible. In Sakhir and Jeddah, with high temperatures, the advantage was more evident. Under other conditions, however, Red Bull and Verstappen are always there, just a few seconds away. Max won at Suzuka and finished less than 3 seconds behind at Jeddah. That's why McLaren must avoid the mistake already seen in 2023, believing too much in their own superiority and underestimating their opponents. It may still be too early to choose a lead driver, but if you want to maximize the result of the Drivers' Championship, a clear direction must be given and logic leads to choosing Piastri. The Mercedes 2014-2016 parallel is intriguing but deceptive. Back then, Hamilton and Rosberg could fight freely because they had no opponents. Today, however, the rivals are there and they know how to close the gap by taking advantage of every mistake. Verstappen in particular remains the man to beat. Cold, consistent, and ruthless, he can maximize every situation, even with an inferior car. And if McLaren really wants to win, it will have to decide quickly whether to give free rein to its drivers or put all its eggs in the basket of whoever has so far proven to deserve the leadership. Norris must accept that currently he is not at Piastri's level in terms of mindset and results. Zak Brown will have to think deeply before letting the internal clash turn into a fratricidal war. The risk of compromising everything is real. Perhaps for Lando, the real goal will be to become the perfect squire, the man capable of complicating Verstappen's life. Because Max, as we know, never gives up, not even if he has an iron under his seat, and at this moment, Piastri is clearly doing better than Norris, so McLaren should be betting on the Australian driver, because he's a sure thing, he's a solid driver, you know he can fight for the title, while Norris is too unpredictable, and he could lose many points over the course of the championship because of his emotionality and also his lack of clarity on the track. We've seen it with many mistakes made in the first part of the championship, and with a Verstappen who manages to get the most out of his car, maybe even a little more. Well, McLaren must not underestimate their rivals. And also watch out for Ferrari, especially with Leclerc, because it could become a formidable opponent again for McLaren from the Spanish Grand Prix onwards. But let's look at the differences between Ferrari and McLaren for the Miami Grand Prix. The temperatures will be very high, and the soft compounds they bring to C3, C4, and C5. The circuit is divided into two sections. We said the first with high and medium speed curves, and the second part with slower curves, where traction and mechanical grip make the difference. McLaren's strength lies right there. The MCL 39 has shown extraordinary effectiveness in managing the rear tires, a crucial element in the slower sections. Piastri has already shown in testing his exceptional corner exit skills with a setup that complements his abilities. On the other hand, Ferrari struggles in these scenarios. The SF25 is more competitive in the bends, but Miami is not their strong point. Despite the second sector slowing down the average lap times, Miami heavily penalizes excessive aerodynamic drag, and McLaren will have to pay attention because top speed remains a weak point for them, as already emerged in Bahrain and Jeddah. Be aware that the brakes will be under pressure. Brembo rates Miami with a severity of 3 out of 5, with particular attention to the braking at turn 17, where you go from 320 to 49.7 miles per hour in a few meters, and the heat will be one of the main actors of the weekend, with a tarmac temperature that could well exceed 50 degrees. The risk of overheating and thermal degradation, even on the dry lap, and we know that McLaren excels in this. It goes very fast on rear limited tracks and in managing rear tires. However, beware of the return of graining. New compounds seen last year are less sensitive, but the risk remains real. The sprint factor could benefit Ferrari, providing an opportunity similar to what Hamilton experienced in Shanghai. It could reshuffle the cards in Miami too if they interpret the soft tire better than the others, which the teams will probably only use in Q3 of Friday's qualifications. McLaren is somewhat favored, but nothing is written. But now I want to see with you instead the difference between Hamilton and Leclerc in braking, because Alex Brandol also highlighted it. In fact, he said Charles Leclerc is Mr. Dozer in braking, applies pressure with precision, managing the pedal with extreme sensitivity. Hamilton instead enters the curve at a higher speed, then brakes with a more decisive impulse, and this style makes the SF25 nervous and unstable. According to Brando, analyzing the telemetry data clearly shows the difference. I study it weekly. In charts of Hamilton, there is a very precise line that connects the steering behavior and braking with minimal variations. It was the same style he had at Mercedes. The question is whether he can change a long-standing habit. We'll see in the coming months. Hamilton is cut short from 3 complex Ferrari weekends, openly expressing frustration, especially at Jeddah. To go fast with this car, a transplant is needed. Sebastian Vettel admitted Ferrari is going through a tough period with no immediate fixes, as his performance significantly lags behind teammate Charles Leclerc this season. The Monegasque is better able to interpret the needs of the SF25, especially in the curve where the balance and stability depend a lot on how the brake is managed during insertion. And we clearly saw it in Jeddah as well, how Hamilton gained something in turns 1-2. But Leclerc overtakes him and progressively extends in all the curves where only sensitivity and control on the brake pedal are needed. Right there emerges that fluid and measured style that Alex Brandol has defined as Mr. Major. And this is another difference, which emerged in Jeddah and favors the Monegasque, who manages to enter perhaps less strong than Hamilton in the curve, but to use the brake release better, and therefore have a more stable rear, managing to better manually balance the load between front and rear, creating less imbalance between one part and the other, managing to use the brake release better. This essentially is the difference that Leclerc is making on Hamilton, and that leads Hamilton to choose softer setups compared to Leclerc, but which make the single-seater more unstable or slower. Instead, how does Red Bull present itself in Miami? The characteristics of the American track and the weather conditions put a strain on the balance of the RB21, called to respond on two critical fronts: setup and tire management. Let's say that Miami is not exactly the best track for Red Bull, and Red Bull can count on an advantage in the faster sections thanks to the high aerodynamic load of the RB21 and an excellent top speed already seen in action in Jeddah. But the real test will be the second sector, where traction and mechanical grip become crucial. And what will be the Achilles heel of the RB21? Red Bull continues to struggle in the more tortuous sections. As far as Verstappen and the team have sought solutions such as softer setups to improve traction, the results have not been satisfactory. The most evident example was in Bahrain, where the car's balance in the slow mix left something to be desired. In Miami, it is likely that Red Bull will choose to focus everything on performance in the first sector, taking advantage of the lateral grip and precision in direction changes, then limit the damage in the slow, where McLaren and Ferrari could come back into play. And also pay attention to the heat and management under pressure. Miami is expecting record high temperatures this season, with asphalt potentially surpassing 50 degrees. Red Bull, more suited to cooler tracks like Suzuka, faces a significant challenge. The thermal degradation will be high and the risk of graining is real, especially in the second sector, where skidding out of the curve can compromise traction. Already in Bahrain, Verstappen had to resort to shore shift, a technique to reduce skidding, losing efficiency during acceleration. In Miami, the risk of finding oneself in a similar situation is real, despite the setup changes introduced in Jeddah that had improved thermal management. The aerodynamic package expected at Imola should bring significant updates for Red Bull, but before then, Red Bull will have to try to limit the damage in Miami. The podium remains a realistic goal if it will compete with Ferrari, but the victory seems to be in the hands of McLaren, with Mercedes instead chasing. Let me know in the comments your opinion on all the topics we covered in the video. As always, I remind you to leave a like, to subscribe and activate notifications so you don't miss any video on the channel. I leave you other related videos here from Rasaduto. See you in a next video.